Chapter 5. In the Grocery Store During the War Years. I was 11 years old when Pearl Harbor was invaded and forced the United States into World War II. Every day I read about our troops, their gains, and their losses. It was difficult to believe how many lives were lost daily. It was far beyond my understanding why people would kill other people. What was there to gain? How could anyone win if you lose thousands of young men? It made no sense to me as a young man. It still does not make sense. The times were difficult for many people. Sugar and gas were rationed. They had to use stamps then, much like using food stamps today. We lived in a neighborhood that was well integrated, but my father never showed any signs of prejudice or racism. He treated everyone with kindness. We thought perhaps too much. He would also allow people to buy food on credit. There were many pages in the credit book, especially during the war years and after. Dad never really pressed people to pay. If they said times were hard and they will pay when they can, he accepted their word. Dad always told me a person is only as good as his word. So he trusted everyone who promised to pay back. Everybody liked him regardless of their skin color. They used to call him Mr. Jake. Dad's first name was Jacob. My mother was called Mrs. Jake. I always smiled when they gave her that name. Both names were meant to be a term of endearment. While World War II was underway, a minor war broke out in Detroit in 1942. I am not certain of all the details, but as I remember, a race riot started with a fight between a white sailor and a black civilian. I believe it took place around Belle Isle and was well publicized by the newspapers. The riot was not confined to any particular part of the city. It seemed to be everywhere. Black and white people threw caution to the wind. There must have been much anger and violent feelings held back until that time. There was violence all around us, from people actually being thrown off bridges to local areas invaded by one color or the other. At one point, my parents had us taken to my sister Marie's home in Ferndale. It doesn't seem far away today, but at that time it was considered out of the danger zone. There was talk of hundreds of blacks who previously lived peacefully with us in the integrated section on Mount Elliott and Vernon that were now on the warpath of destruction. As a matter of fact, the very next day, a large contingent of blacks were coming down Waterloo Street, heading straight for my parents' grocery store. Witnesses later describe in detail what took place. There was every intent of breaking the windows and helping themselves to a lot of food. There was also a big supply of knives in the butcher section of the store. They couldn't wait to get their hands on a supply of things they could not buy. Regardless of the race riot, right now the store was a bonus, a prize package. Just as the enraged crowd reached the store after turning over cars parked on the street, they were now ready to take their spoils. Then a very brave black man, well known in the neighborhood, spoke up. It was James Kennard, one of my dad's regular customers. Not only did he love my parents, but his son Jim once told me he looked up to my folks as his second parents. His father threw his hands up to get attention and shouted in a very loud voice, "Now listen here. You are not going to touch this store. It belongs to Mr. Jake. He is a good man. He gives us all credit. He likes us folks. He talks to us as friends." Then he pointed to several people in the crowd, how they too were well treated by Mr. Jake and Mrs. Jake. "You can do what you want to the other places around here, but you leave this place alone." Others then stood with him and helped prevent any harm to the grocery store. Needless to say, our whole family was amazed at the courage of Mr. Kennard and the others, demonstrating true bravery in a very delicate situation. We were able to return home shortly after. It was quite true that my dad allowed credit to many customers. When he sold the store and we had moved, one of my sisters found the notebook with the names of each customer and the amount of money they owed. It literally was in the thousands of dollars. My father never lost any sleep over it. In fact, he didn't even try to recover the money. He felt sorry for them and let it go. As a young boy, I had first-hand example of my father's generosity and extraordinary response to financial loss. I was told by my mother that during the Depression of 1929, she and my dad had to give up their life savings. While working at General Motors, Dad had accumulated a good number of stocks open to employees. One of my relatives had loaned my dad some money and demanded payment immediately. Our cousin didn't really need the money at the time. He was still secure during the Depression, but he kept after my father to pay up, all of it. That would mean selling all his stocks at the worst possible time when they were at their lowest value. Well, he sold them and paid his very close relative in full. Years later, my Uncle Don, who had a good understanding of stocks and their value, told us that those same stocks would have been worth several $1,000,000 about the time when my father sold the store. Of course, they would have been worth much, much more today. Again, my father was nothing like those despondent businessmen who actually jumped out of windows during the crash in the stock market, nor did he speak in violent terms about it. The store was only about 2 blocks from St. Bonaventure Monastery. The monks would buy their food wholesale to keep their soup kitchen supplied sufficiently. Donations made it possible to feed hundreds of hungry people every day. Sometimes they would happen to run out of certain perishable foods, such as milk, fruit, or vegetables. On such occasions, it was usually Father Solanus Casey who would walk down the street to buy those items for my parents. Father Solanus was known as a very holy man who healed many people. He will be declared a saint someday. When I was about 5 years old, I remember seeing Father Solanus come in. I didn't know anything about him at the time, but I do remember him taking a large bag of groceries to the counter. He paid for them, but before he could leave, my dad asked him to wait for just a moment. Then Dad brought another bag filled with fruits and vegetables and gave it to him. He thanked my dad kindly and walked out. I said, "Dad, he didn't pay for that second bag." My dad looked at me with a little smile on his face and a hand on my shoulder and said, "Someday you will understand why I gave that extra bag of groceries to him." Sometime later, I did come to understand and to realize once again that my father was truly a generous man. Money was definitely not top priority with my father. He would make any sacrifice for his family. His only concern was being a good provider, and that he was. While working at Cadillac Motors, which was on the west side of Detroit, my father walked every day to work and from work to save on expenses. I am talking about a distance of 5 miles a couple of hours before daylight. And that is just one way. In the cold of winter, it is almost unimaginable. I'm speaking of 25 years working at the same place, denying himself a streetcar or a bus to save some small change every day. Chapter 6. School Days. I distinctly remember my first day at school. I was registered into the first grade by my sister Lillian. She told the sister in charge that my name was Junior. I immediately shouted to the top of my voice, "My name is Jacob Joseph Samonie." My sister stood corrected, and they both smiled approvingly. I had been called Junior up until that time, at home, with family and relatives. I was still called Junior right up until the time I was called Father, as an ordained clergyman. In a sense, I never really had a name until after ordination. I then chose the name Jay. School was a lot of fun for me. God gave me a good mind to work with. I never had difficulty with my studies, and my average mark was an A in every subject. And somehow spelling came easy to me. When I was in the 4th grade, we had our annual spelling bee. I beat all the 4th graders, so the teacher decided to put me in 5th grade spelling bee. I beat the 5th graders. They then put me up against the 6th graders. I beat the 6th grade class. The whole school became aware of what was going on, so some of the 7th and 8th grade boys went to the principal, St. Lucina, and told her they would beat me up on the playground if she allowed me to compete in their spelling bees. I was told they used pretty strong language. What I heard was, "You put that little brat in the 7th or 8th grade spelling bee and we'll fix him good on the playground." Needless to say, I was spared a black eye or whatever. I have to admit, When I was up against the last sixth grader in the spelling bee, I had to make a big decision. She was a girl of my dreams, and wouldn't you know, we were the last two standing. It was either her or me. She just happened to be, in my opinion, the prettiest girl in the school. She never knew I was a secret admirer of hers. Why should she be interested in a fourth grade kid? But I decided to deliberately misspell the next word and let her win. It would be my gift to her. Besides, what was I doing in the sixth grade when I belonged in the fourth grade? I waited. It was her turn to take a word. I honestly don't remember what the word was, but she spelled it incorrectly. She was out, so I decided that I might as well spell the word correctly. I did, and won. It broke my heart, but she looked like a good sport. In 1944, at the age of 14, I went to the seminary to study for the priesthood. It was not a simple road to get there. Rather, it was a strange and extraordinary path that led me to the seminary. First of all, I did not get support from home that one would expect, at least not in the beginning. Let me explain. When I was in my teens, my parents decided to follow another custom from the old country. Back in Hasrun, Lebanon, this was the way it was done. Since God gave them more than one son, after 10 tries, they were supposed to give one son back to God by encouraging the eldest son to go to the seminary or a monastery to become a priest. This was the mark of a truly devout and Christian family. I, in turn, would get married, they had already picked out a cousin for me, and raise sons to keep the famous family name going. However, we were living in the United States of America, not Lebanon. My brother, understandably, was not happy with the idea, but the pastor of Our Lady of Sorrows parish also encouraged Tony to take the entrance test to the seminary. He was at first hopeful, but in the final analysis, it wasn't his calling. He did not actually attend the seminary that fall, but rather enrolled in St. Rose High School. I was in sixth grade at the time. I thought maybe I was cut out for the priesthood. With my brother free to marry, I no longer had to get married and raise sons. So I told my mother of my intention. She said, "Son, I think that's a good idea, but they would never accept you in the seminary to become a priest." I sadly inquired why. "Because you're a shit-shot." Shot rhymes with thought. This is an Arabic word that means a real slob or sloppy kid. That was true. I was never conscious of my appearance, whether I looked good or bad, properly dressed or wearing very old or torn clothes. Shoes untied, hair in my eyes, and pockets full of nails, bottle caps, agates, or whatever I could find on a given day that seemed interesting. She was absolutely right. But that was when I was younger. Along about the fourth grade on, I began to discover girls. My mother had noticed I had started to dress better, look better, and had one eye on the opposite sex. The change was probably not even obvious to me, and so my life direction began to take shape. I then gave up the idea of becoming a priest. I continued to be a good student at Our Lady of Sorrows School on Meldrum and Benson, not far from home. My classmates chose me president of the class when I was in the 8th grade. Sister Mary Lucina, my teacher in the 8th grade, was also the principal of the school. There was no middle school at that time. We went right into high school after graduating from the 8th grade. 3 other boys in the class were planning to go to Sacred Heart Seminary in Detroit. Sister Lucina was after me all during the 8th grade. "I feel that God is calling you to the priesthood," or "think about it." I kept telling her I was not going to the seminary. Then I made what I thought was a final decision. I signed up to go to St. Joseph High School for boys taught by Christian brothers. It was located behind St. Joseph Church on J Street in the downtown area. The school was close. It had a great teaching staff. I could be well prepared to enter one of the universities and choose a profession. I paid a portion of the tuition. My future was all set, so I thought. The principal, with a one-track mind, would not give up on me. She continued to pursue me to the extent that I finally agreed to take the entrance test with the other boys planning to go to Sacred Heart High School. I made it very clear to her that I will not be going to Sacred Heart, but rather to St. Joseph High School. I took the test just before graduation and passed. We were told that there were several hundred applicants. In 1944, it was considered an honor and a privilege to go to the seminary. I believe about 125 of us passed and received a letter welcoming us to enter the seminary officially in September. At that time, they took boys into the 9th grade. To become a priest, the normal process was 4 years of high school and 4 years of college at a minor seminary, Sacred Heart. The last 4 years of theology was at St. John's Major Seminary in Plymouth, Michigan. From the time you entered, you had 12 years to make the final decision. One could leave at any time. Some entered Sacred Heart after finishing high school, others came in after college or with degrees from a university. It didn't matter. As long as a young man could pass the written and oral entrance tests, they were welcome. I told the good sister that I kept my side of the bargain. I then felt very free to pursue my future as I had planned. During this whole process, I never mentioned anything to my family. My parents, brother, and sisters only knew about St. Joe's. They had no idea what was going on between myself and Sister Lucina, who kept reminding me that God was calling me to the priesthood. I guess I had no idea either. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for the next reading of Father J. Samonie's book.